He married the girl who smiled prettier, but when fever came, it wasn't her hands that steadied his. It was the woman he'd left behind, riding through firelight and shame to stand where no one else would. The door wouldn't budge, not from his snow, from something else, a weight behind it like sorrow sealed in wood. Annabeth pushed harder, her palm blistered from the rains, her breath white and fast in the cold. "Matthew," she called, already knowing the answer. No voice came, not from him, not from the house. She leaned harder, shoulders striking the door with a grunt. It gave. The stench met her first, sweat and sickness, wood smoke and rot. It clawed up her nose and made her stomach churn, but she stepped inside anyway. She didn't flinch. Not this time. The cabin was dark, save for the low flicker of a dying fire and the faintest groan from the back room. That was where she went, unfastening her cloak as she moved, her boots still crusted with snow and dirt from the long ride. She didn't pause to look around. She knew this house. She'd built it, painted the walls, stitched the curtains, folded the linen. She'd slept in that bed, too, once, before she was traded in for someone with smoother skin and fewer years behind her eyes. She found him collapsed on the floor beside the bed, shirt soaked through with sweat, chest rising too fast, too shallow. "Matthew Dalton. Of course it's you," she muttered, half to herself. His hair stuck to his forehead in clumps. His lips were cracked. One hand twitched uselessly against the floorboards. For a second, she just stood there, looking down at the man who'd once promised her forever, then broke that promise for a girl who hadn't even learned to keep a hearth warm. Annabeth knelt beside him and laid her hand to his cheek. Burning. Gods, he was burning up. She stripped the bed with quick, practiced motions, dragging the sheets onto the floor and rolling him onto them. He moaned then, soft and guttural. Not words, not recognition, just pain. "You never could take care of yourself," she whispered. "Lucky for you, I still can." It had been 3 years since he'd sent her away. No, not sent. Left. She'd woken to a note and silence. The place she called home already emptied of half its soul. He'd taken everything, horse, rifle, pride. The only thing he hadn't taken was her grief. But the letter had come 2 days ago, folded and ragged, delivered by a frightened stable hand who wouldn't meet her eyes. "He's dying," it said, "and I don't know what to do." Not signed by Matthew. Signed by Rose. Annabeth knew that name. The younger bride, barely 21, soft-spoken, sweet-faced. The one Matthew had paraded through town like she was the prize he'd been waiting for all his life. The same girl who had now vanished, too scared, too young, or too shallow to stay once death came calling. Annabeth didn't care. She didn't come for Rose. She came because she was the only one who remembered how Matthew liked his water lukewarm when he was fevered. She came because someone had to. She came because, once, she'd loved him enough to build a life out of nothing. Now, she'd build him back from the edge, if he hadn't already stepped too far. The fever broke sometime past midnight. Annabeth stayed by his side, sponging his brow, forcing sips of broth between his teeth, and whispering through clenched teeth when he nearly bit her finger in his delirium. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains. The cabin creaked. Time dragged like a wounded beast. She didn't sleep, not even when the fire threatened to die, not even when her hands cramped from wringing cloth and chopping herbs, not even when Matthew muttered names in his half-sleep that weren't hers. "Rose." He croaked once, voice dry as old bones. "Please." Annabeth said nothing, but she boiled more water. When dawn crept slow and colorless over the ridge, he opened his eyes. At first, he didn't speak, just stared. Her face hovered inches from his, older than when he'd left at last, hair tied back, eyes ringed with wear. "Annabeth," he rasped. She didn't smile. "Don't talk. You'll choke again." He blinked, swallowed, then frowned like maybe he was still dreaming. Why are you here?" She dipped the rag into the basin and pressed it to his lips. Because no one else showed up. He winced. Good, she thought. Let's sting. She turned to reach for the tincture beside the bed. His hand caught her wrist. "Where's Rose?" he asked. Annabeth didn't look at him. "Gone." The word hung like a noose in the room. "Gone." She sent the letter, then disappeared. Guess she wasn't built for watching a man rot from the inside out. Silence. He let go of her wrist. I thought. He began, then stopped, coughing again, hard and wet. It shook him to the core. When he finished, he was trembling. I know what you thought, Annabeth said quietly. Doesn't matter now. He lay back, eyes fluttering. You shouldn't be here. She dipped the cloth again. No, I shouldn't. Another silence, but this one different. Thicker. Matthew turned his head to look at her, the skin of his neck gone slack with weight loss and fever. Why did you come? She didn't answer. Just pressed the cloth to his chest and whispered, rest. Because the real answer wasn't something she was ready to say. Not yet. Not while part of her still wanted to hit him with a basin. By the second day, he was stronger. Not strong. Just less likely to die if the wind changed. Annabeth cleaned the house in brutal silence, cleared mold from dishes, dumped out spoiled stew, stripped the bed again. She found a single lace shawl left hanging by the door. Roses. She didn't touch it. She spent her hours brewing tea and slicing roots. She fed Matthew, propped him up, held a bucket to his mouth when he retched. All of it without complaint, without comfort. She gave him nothing extra, just what he needed. You still wear the ring, he murmured once, catching a glimpse of her hand. It won't come off, she lied. Another time, he said, I miss the stew you used to make with cornbread crumbled on top. She didn't reply. And once, when the fever came back in a sudden wave, he whispered, I shouldn't have left. I shouldn't have, but by then, he was shaking again, sweating and delirious, and she just whispered, hush, and held his head while he wept like a boy too far from home. She didn't cry with him. She wanted to, but she didn't, because the pain had hardened too deep to rise anymore. It was on the third night that she heard the hoofbeats. Annabeth froze, spoon still in hand. The stew was finally ready. Actual stew this time, not the broth she'd been boiling for days. The sound came again, hoofbeats. 2 horses, maybe 3. She went to the window, lifted the curtain. Shadows moved through the dark, just beyond the edge of the firelight. They weren't from town. She knew the town riders. These were strangers, and they weren't moving slow. She crossed the cabin and lifted the rifle from above the door. It was loaded. Of course it was. He'd always been careful about that. Matthew stirred in the bed. What is it? Quiet, she whispered. A knock. Not weak. Not like hers had been. This one was hard. Demanding. The second knock came faster. Then a voice. Dalton. We know you're in there. Annabeth's blood ran cold. She stepped to the door, rifle in hand, and prayed this wasn't the end of the part she hadn't even decided she wanted to start again. The third knock wasn't as loud as the second, but it was sharper, more deliberate, like the man on the other side had decided patience wasn't required anymore. Annabeth kept the rifle leveled chest high, fingers steady despite the way her gut twisted. This wasn't a fever she could sponge away. These weren't ghosts she could ignore. These were men, and men knocking that way meant trouble. Dalton, the voice barked again. We rode near 40 miles. We ain't leaving empty-handed. Matthew's voice came hoarse and panicked from the bed. Don't. Annabeth, don't open. I wasn't planning to, she said flatly. She stepped back from the door, kept low, eyes flicking toward the window. One of the horses shifted outside, its silhouette thrown crooked by firelight and frost. 3 riders. She guessed right. But who were they? She didn't recognize the voice. Didn't recognize the sharp edge in it either. Not a bounty hunter's tone, and not a sheriff's. There was no law in it. No patience. Just debt, maybe, or blood. Matthew groaned and tried to sit up. They're from Elkhorn. I think. You think, she snapped, keeping her voice low. They loaned me. I didn't think they'd find me this fast. Annabeth's teeth clenched. What did you promise them? Matthew's eyes darted. I was trying to buy more land before the sickness hit. I thought Rose's father might help, but of course. The younger bride came with nothing but warm skin and bright smiles, and no dowry. Annabeth's stomach turned. The voice came again. You've got 5 seconds before we come in swinging. She moved fast, shoving the kitchen table across the floor and bracing it against the door. She wedged the stool under the handle for good measure. The whole thing rattled when a next knock landed like a hammer blow. Annabeth, Matthew croaked. There's money. In the chest under the bed. She didn't answer. She was already dragging the chest out with one hand while the other clutched the rifle. The lock popped easy. Inside, bills wrapped in twine. More than she expected. Not enough to explain what kind of deal he'd struck. She yanked half of it free and shoved it into a flour sack. Can it be bought off? Matthew didn't answer. His face had gone gray. The next sound wasn't a knock. It was a boot. A heavy one. It slammed against the door once, then again. Wood cracked. The latch gave way. The table shifted half an inch with the impact. For seconds, the voice roared. Annabeth moved without thinking. She swung the front window wide, shoved the flour sack into Matthew's arms, and hissed, "If they get in, you hide. Under the floorboards, if you can crawl. You remember how?" He nodded weakly. She didn't wait. She was already slipping out the window, rifle strapped across her back, snow crunching under her boots like brittle glass. The moonlight was thin, barely enough to cut through the cold haze. But she saw them, 3 men. 2 on horseback, one now standing at the door, readying for a final blow. He was tall, wiry, and wore a coat trimmed in fur. Not for warmth, for show. She raised a rifle and aimed. "Step away," she called, voice cold as the mountain air. All 3 heads turned. The man at the door froze. "Who the hell?" "Doesn't matter," she said. "This rifle's loaded. Your horse is not fast enough." The second rider peered at her through the gloom. "That her? Dalton's first wife?" "She's got grit," the third murmured. The tall one snarled. "Lady, unless you plan on shooting, I suggest you walk away." Annabeth didn't blink. "Try me." The next few seconds dragged long and tense, breath steaming in the cold, fingers twitching near triggers. Then the leader stepped back from the door slowly, lifting his hands in mock surrender. "All right," he said, "you got steel, but don't mistake nerves for power. We'll be back, and next time, we don't knock." They turned, rode off, and Annabeth didn't lower the rifle until the night swallowed them whole. Back inside, Matthew hadn't moved from the bed, but his breathing was faster now, his eyes glazed. Fever again. Annabeth slammed the window shut and dropped the bar behind the door. She didn't speak, didn't sit, just boiled water, ground willow bark, and prepared for another long night of listening to a man she used to love cry out for mercy while she offered him none. By morning, he was barely lucid. "Why are you still here?" he rasped, half dreaming. "Because the storm outside doesn't scare me," she wanted to say. "Because you're too stubborn to die and too stupid to survive alone." But what she said was, "I still remember the vows, even if you don't." He blinked, then closed his eyes. And she hated him then, for everything. For the ring still clinging to her hand. For the house she'd helped build only to be exiled from. For the years she'd spent piecing herself back together. Only to end up here, nursing the man who broke her. But she still tucked the blanket tighter around him. Still poured another cup of tea. Still whispered, "Sleep," as if it were a kindness. 2 more days passed. The strangers didn't return. The fever broke again, this time slower, cleaner. Matthew's color returned bit by bit, the hollows beneath his cheekbones filling just enough to make him recognizable again. He could eat now, could sit up, could speak without gasping. He never mentioned the men, but he watched the door too often for it to be coincidence. On the 4th morning, he said, "You saved my life." Annabeth didn't stop slicing onions. "I didn't do it for you." "Then why?" She turned, met his eyes. "Because when we stood on that altar, you promised not to leave me in sickness. You broke that promise." "I won't." He didn't reply, just looked away. Outside, the snow had started to melt. Not quickly, but enough to bare the grass in patches. Enough to make the trail visible again. "You'll leave soon," Matthew said later, after supper. Annabeth didn't answer. He cleared his throat. "Where did you go after?" "Doesn't matter. It does to me." She stared at the fire. "You never wrote." I didn't know what to say. "You managed plenty to say to Rose." Silence. She added another log to the hearth. "I was stupid," he said after a long pause. "I thought I needed something different. I thought I'd miss my chance at happiness." "And did you?" He didn't answer, which said plenty. That night, she dreamed of their wedding. Simple, quiet, held in a clearing behind the old church, with wildflowers woven into her braid, and Matthew's hand shaking as he slipped the ring on. She believed every word then, believed that forever meant something. She woke with her fist clenched tight around the quilt, tears staining her cheek, and the scent of cedar smoke thick in the air. Matthew was already up, dressed, boots on. He leaned against the doorframe like a man 10 years older than he'd been last week. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "For what?" "For everything. That would have meant something once. But now? Now it just sounded like a man too weak to carry his guilt anymore." She stood, folded her things into the saddlebag. He watched, but didn't try to stop her. The door opened easy this time. No snow, no ghosts, just sun, pale and hesitant, but sun all the same. She stepped out into it, and only paused when she heard him say, "You always did come through when it mattered most." She turned her head just slightly, and you always realized that 1 minute too late. Then she mounted the horse and rode down the trail. Not fast, not like someone escaping, just steady, like someone who'd made peace with the wreckage behind her and wasn't willing to carry it any farther. But behind her, inside that cabin, something stirred. Not Matthew. Not yet. Something else. Something left behind by the men from Elkhorn. Tucked beneath the floorboards. A slip of paper. A brand mark. A signature not meant to be seen. And a warning yet to come. Annabeth hadn't even made it past the river bend when the first sign came. A thin column of smoke, not from a chimney, but too neat to be wildfire, rose up from behind the ridge, black against the sky. She slowed her horse, watched, waited. It didn't change, didn't vanish. Too far to be from the Dalton cabin. Too close to be ignored. She nudged her mare forward again, eyes hard on the horizon. Something gnawed at her gut, not fear exactly, something older, like recognition without memory. That smoke meant something. She just didn't know what yet. By midday, she reached the crossroads where the trail forked. North to the hollow, south to the rail line. Her original plan had been to ride south, catch a wagon west, and forget Matthew Dalton all over again. But her hands tugged the reins north. The hollow was where she'd been after he left. The only place that didn't ask questions or expect smiles. Run by an old woman named Cora, who brewed moonshine stronger than any man's pride and gave Annabeth a corner to sleep in for half a year, without once asking what had broken her so bad she still flinched when church bells rang. Maybe Cora would still be there. Maybe not. Either way, it felt like the only place that made sense now. She hadn't gone 5 minutes down the northern trail when she heard the hoofbeats. Fast, too fast for casual travel. She turned in the saddle, heart thudding. One rider, then another. 2 men, riding hard and coming up behind her like wolves who'd already tasted blood. She didn't wait for confirmation. She kicked her horse and veered off the trail into the woods, branches slapping her face, ice shattering beneath the hooves. Gunfire cracked behind her. The first shot missed. The second didn't. It struck a tree inches from her left leg, splitting bark in a flash of powder and smoke. Annabeth ducked low, urging the mare faster, her breath coming in clouds, her teeth clenched against the rush of fear now screaming through her chest. She could hear them crashing through the underbrush behind her, cursing, shouting. But the woods were tight here, and she'd ridden these parts as a girl. She knew the deer tracks, the hidden dips where a careless hoof could break. She jerked the reins hard and ducked beneath a low branch, then turned sharply uphill, climbing a slope slick with old frost. Her horse faltered, but kept going. When she reached the top, she pulled the rifle from her back, wheeled around, and aimed low. The first rider came through the trees, face twisted with fury. She fired. His horse screamed and collapsed. The rider flew forward, striking a pine trunk with a crack that sounded too final to be anything but fatal. The second man reined in, eyes wide. He didn't even try to shoot, just turned and vanished back the way he came. Annabeth sat shaking on the ridge, smoke curling from the barrel of her rifle, her ears ringing. It had been years since she'd fired at anything but rabbits. And now a man was dead. She didn't wait long, just long enough to catch her breath, reload, and say a quick prayer over the body without climbing down. She didn't know his name. Didn't need to. He made his choices. She rode the rest of the day without stopping, heart still hammering with every shadow in the trees, every rustle of leaves. When she finally reached the hollow, the sun was a red smear on the edge of the world, and her mare was lathered in sweat. The place hadn't changed. 3 cabins, 1 general store, and the old church with its steeple canted like a drunk leaning too far in the wind. Cora's shack sat off to the left, smoke curling from the chimney like a welcome. Annabeth dismounted stiffly and knocked once before opening the door. Cora didn't look surprised. "Well," she said, "hell must be cold again." Annabeth gave a tired smile. "It snowed last week." Cora poured her a drink. "It took 2 hours, a plate of stew, and half a jar of whiskey before the words came. Not all of them, but enough. I went back," Annabeth said softly. Cora's eyebrows rose. "He was sick, dying." Rose left. "That little thing," Cora snorted, "wasn't worth a dowry nickel." "No," Annabeth said, "but she wrote me, asked for help." Cora poured another splash of whiskey. "And you went." "I thought." Annabeth shook her head. "I don't know what I thought." They sat in silence. The fire cracked. Outside, a wolf howled. Finally, Cora said, "You always did try to fix broken things." Annabeth stared into the flames. He said sorry. Was it worth hearing? I don't know. That was the truth. She didn't know what it had cost her, only that she'd paid it willingly. She spent 2 nights at the hollow, helping Cora chop wood, cleaning the chapel, tending a sick foal in the back stable. It felt good, honest, like her hands were hers again. But the second night, just after dusk, a rider came. Not for Cora, for her. He wore a black hat and a badge. Sheriff Rowland. "Mrs. Dalton," he said, tipping the brim. "Not anymore." Annabeth, then. She folded her arms. "What is it?" "Matthew sent me." She blinked. "He sent what?" "He's got a bullet hole in his roof. Says a floorboard was lifted. Found a paper marked with the Slater brand. That mean anything to you?" Annabeth's stomach turned. The Slaters were ranchers, but not the honest kind. They didn't run cattle. They ran numbers. Guns. Debt. And if one of them had a paper under Matthew's floor, it meant this wasn't over. She set her cup down slowly. "What else?" "Letter addressed to Rose. Unopened. Looks recent. And a note for you." He handed it to her. Just her name. Nothing else. Inside, in Matthew's familiar hand, "They weren't after me. They were after her." Annabeth stared. Her could only mean Rose. "But why?" She looked up. "Is he all right?" "He's alive," the sheriff said. "But he's scared. Wants you back." "I'm not going back," she said instantly. The sheriff nodded slowly. "Didn't think so. Just figured you'd want to know. If they come for Rose, they might come for you." Loose ends. Annabeth swallowed. "Where is she?" "No one knows." Not true. She had a guess. She'd seen the blue shawl Rose always wore draped across the cabin peg. Fresh, unworn, and never used in the cold snap. That meant she hadn't gone far. She wouldn't run east. It was too exposed. She wouldn't go west. Mountain passes were too deep with snow. But south? South was the train line. And if the Slaters were hunting her, it meant she'd seen something. Stolen something. Or broken a deal. And Matthew had lied. He hadn't just borrowed money. He'd taken something that didn't belong to him and handed it to a girl who didn't know the weight of what she carried. Now they were both in danger. And Annabeth, somehow, was still tethered to the wreckage. She left at dawn. Told Cora nothing more than thank you. Told the sheriff to keep watch over the cabin. Told herself that this was the last time she'd ride for a man who couldn't be bothered to stand for her when it counted. But it wasn't for Matthew anymore. It was for something else. Something raw and unfinished. Because someone was hunting the girl who replaced her, and Annabeth couldn't decide if that made her responsible or just human. She found tracks halfway to the rail line, barely a day old. A woman's boot prints, light and hurried, heading south. Alone, at night, she made camp beneath a bluff and stared at the stars. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Matthew lying half dead, whispering her name, or heard the voice of the man outside the door promising to return without knocking next time. And now there was a name, Slater, a target, and a girl who might already be dead. But something told her Rose wasn't dead yet. Not yet. The trail was still warm. And Annabeth had unfinished business with more than just her past. She found Rose 2 nights later at a railway junction town, so small it didn't have a proper name. Just a sign that read Water Stop 9 nailed crooked above a saloon door. One street, 2 buildings, and a windmill turning slow above an abandoned cattle yard. The kind of place you only stopped at if your horse was dying or your guilt was chasing too hard to let you sleep on a moving train. Annabeth's horse limped into town past midnight. She dismounted outside the boarding house and tied the reins loosely, fingers stiff from the cold and travel. Her legs ached. Her coat reeked of smoke and old sweat. But she moved like a woman who had no intention of collapsing, yet. The boarding house keeper didn't even lift his eyes from the newspaper when she asked for a list of recent guests. But when she laid a silver coin on the desk, he grunted and pointed up the stairs. Room 3. She don't sleep much. Talks in her sleep, though. Annabeth knocked once. Nothing. She knocked again. Still silence. She sighed, pressed her palm flat to the door, and said, just loud enough, Rose. It's me. The latch clicked. The door opened a sliver. A single terrified eye appeared in the gap, and then Rose threw it open all the way and stumbled forward like she was falling into a dream. I thought you wouldn't come. I wrote, but then I ran. Annabeth caught her shoulders gently. Slow down. Are you all right? Rose looked thinner, paler. Her hair tangled. A bruise along her jaw had started to yellow. Her hands trembled when they touched Annabeth's sleeves, like she couldn't believe someone had come for her. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know who they were. Annabeth led her back inside and shut the door behind them. Tell me everything. They sat on the edge of the bed while the oil lamp flickered low. Outside, the wind shifted dust around the empty yard. I thought Matthew was just borrowing money, Rose began. For the cattle. For the barn. He said the ranch needed fixing if we were going to raise a family. Annabeth didn't speak. He started meeting with a man in a blue coat. Said he was an investor from the East. I didn't ask questions. I should have. You were trying to be loyal, Annabeth said softly. It's not a crime. Rose laughed bitterly. Isn't it? Annabeth looked at her. What do they want? I don't know. They gave him a package. He hid it under the floor. But he never opened it, I swear. Then 2 days later, the man came back angry. Said Matthew had lied. So we owed him something. What was in the package? Rose looked pale. A map. I only saw it once. It had markings. XS names. One was mine, I think. South of Bitter Hollow. Annabeth's mouth tightened. That explained the fire in the Slater's eyes. The map wasn't just property. It was worth something. Land. Gold, maybe. Smuggling routes, even. And Matthew had played middleman in a game far too large for him. You ran, Annabeth said. Rose nodded. I thought if I could get far enough, they'd stop. They never do, Annabeth murmured. Rose's eyes filled. I'm sorry. I didn't know what he'd done. I thought he was good. He made me feel seen. Annabeth didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say. Instead, she reached into her saddlebag and pulled out the envelope the sheriff had given her, the one marked for Rose. Rose hesitated, took it with shaking hands, tore it open. She read in silence, then let it fall to the floor. I don't believe him anymore, she said. I know, but Annabeth picked up the letter anyway. The words were short, rambling, guilt-ridden. Matthew begging Rose to come home, to bring the map if she had it, to forgive him if she didn't. He wrote of debts he couldn't pay and names he couldn't say. He wrote like a man already drowning. Annabeth folded the paper and tucked it into her coat. Then she asked the question that had burned since she left the Dalton cabin. Do you still have it? Rose blinked. The map. Yes. Rose rose to her feet and crossed to her bag. She opened a seam along the lining and pulled free a crumpled cloth parcel. Inside, a map drawn in careful strokes. Ink and blood both faded. Annabeth unrolled it across the bed. 3 mines, 2 names, and 1 circled X. South of Bitter Hollow, Deadwood Ridge. She stared. It wasn't just land. It was buried history. And no one marked something this carefully unless there was danger to be found. Why would Matthew hide this? Rose whispered. Why wouldn't he sell it? Annabeth's jaw clenched, because he knew someone would kill for it, and someone still might. They left at dawn, didn't bother checking out, didn't pack much. They didn't speak much on the road either. It took them 2 days to reach the ridge. They made camp once in a dry cave, once in the hollow trunk of a burned-out pine. Annabeth kept watch both nights. Her dreams were still filled with hoofbeats and fire. But when they reached the ridge, it wasn't empty. There were already men there. 4 of them, tents pitched, tools out, guns slung across hips like jewelry. Annabeth pulled Rose behind a boulder and watched through a crack in the stone. "Slater men," she said. "How can you tell? No one else carries a Henry rifle with the stock cut short. They think it makes them fast." Rose swallowed. "What now?" Annabeth studied the camp. "They're looking for the entrance. They don't have the map yet." Rose looked at her. "You're not thinking of giving it to them?" "No." Annabeth's fingers curled around the edge of the stone. "I'm thinking of burying it so deep they never find it." They waited until nightfall, then moved. It took 2 hours to circle the ridge and locate the entrance. A collapsed shaft half hidden behind a screen of brush. Annabeth lowered herself into the dark, Rose behind her, hands trembling on the rope. The air was dry, dead, smelled like rust and secrets. They moved through the mine with slow, careful steps. It hadn't been worked in years, but someone had come here recently. Lanterns' soot marked the walls. Footprints in the dust. At the bottom, they found it. A crate. Sealed. Annabeth pried it open. Inside, documents. Ledgers. Names. Trade routes. And 1 badge. A marshal's badge, blackened by ash. Annabeth exhaled slowly. "This isn't about gold," she whispered. "This is about proof." "Proof of what?" Annabeth picked up a letter. "Read it," then looked at Rose with eyes wide. "Slater's not just a rancher. He's been running guns through the territory, buying lawmen, killing witnesses, and Matthew is helping him." "No," Annabeth said. "Matthew was the witness." Rose paled. "Then, that means they'll never stop hunting until this is destroyed." "But if we destroy it," Rose said, "no one will ever know." Annabeth hesitated, then nodded. "Some things are safer buried." They packed what they could, marked what mattered. Then Annabeth did what she swore she'd never do again. She lit the match and set the truth on fire. They barely made it out before the smoke choked the tunnel. They rode hard, fussed, down the ridge through the trees. Behind them, flames danced in the shaft like demons caged too long. At the tree line, gunfire split the air. The Slater men had seen the smoke. They were coming. Annabeth shoved Rose behind a rock and drew her rifle. Her hands didn't shake now. 3 riders. 1 bullet left. She fired. 1 dropped. The other split. She ran. Rose followed. They didn't stop for an hour. Not until the trees grew so thick even shadows had trouble following. And when they did stop, Annabeth finally let herself breathe. "You okay?" she asked. Rose nodded. Annabeth looked at the smoke now, just a smear on the sky. She didn't know if they'd done the right thing, only that it had to be done, and that the past was finally ash. They didn't speak much the next morning. There wasn't much to say. The fire had consumed everything. Evidence, ledger, badge, even the last fragile thread that might have tied Matthew Dalton to something worth salvaging. All that remained now was a smear of soot on the wind and the memory of gunfire echoing across the ridge. Annabeth rose early, checked the perimeter without waking Rose, and kept 1 hand on the butt of her revolver the whole time. Nothing moved, but that didn't mean they were safe. Rose stirred around dawn. Her voice was rough with sleep and smoke. "They'll still come after us, won't they?" Annabeth didn't lie. Maybe, even without the map. Annabeth looked toward the faint line of smoke still rising in the north. Men like that, when they lose something, they don't think about the loss. They think about who made them lose it. Rose looked down, hands curled tight around the edge of her blanket. "I didn't want any of this." "I know," Annabeth said, "but we're in it now." She didn't say what haunted her most, that this wasn't even her burden to carry. Not really. She could have left Matthew to his ruin. Could have let Rose vanish into the rail towns. Could have stayed in Cora's Hollow and never looked back. But some things burrow deep. Loyalty, Old guilt. The shape of a man's name when you used to speak it with love. And now, even with Matthew a half-dead shadow and the Slater crew scattered, Annabeth couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. Something worse. They rode east, avoided main trails, camped in hollowed trees and empty shepherd huts. The winter had loosened its grip, but not fully. The nights were still cold, and the wind still whispered secrets through the pine. 3 days out from the ridge, they came to a dried-up creek bed. That's where they found the boy. He couldn't have been more than 16, curled up in the underbrush like a kicked dog, shivering in a threadbare coat and clutching a rifle far too heavy for his arms. Annabeth dismounted immediately and approached slow, hands out. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said softly. He aimed a rifle anyway, but the barrel drooped with exhaustion. "Don't come closer," he rasped. Rose watched from his saddle, tense. Annabeth crouched 10 feet away. "You hurt." He didn't answer, just stared at her with fever-glazed eyes. "Then they killed my pa." Annabeth didn't flinch. "Who did?" He swallowed. "Blackcoats. Said he owed for something. He didn't. We didn't owe nobody. They just shot him. Left me. Thought I was dead." Rose slid off her horse now, her face pale. "Slater's men." Annabeth nodded once. "What's your name, son?" "Illy." "All right, Illy. You're safe now." "But we gotta move." They couldn't leave him. He was too weak to ride alone, too scared to let go of the rifle, and too young to bury what he'd seen. Annabeth wrapped him in her spare coat and tied him to her saddle, holding him upright as they rode. He didn't cry, just stared at the trail like he expected it to vanish beneath them at any second. That night, around the fire, he spoke again. "They said something about a list," he mumbled. "Said we were on it." "A list?" Annabeth asked sharply. Illy nodded. "Said anyone who knew was going to burn with the rest." Rose looked at Annabeth. "What list?" Annabeth's mind raced. She thought back to the crate, the papers, the names scrawled in the margins. Could Slater have made a record? Of what? Witnesses? Debtors? Anyone who'd seen too much? She turned to Eli. "Your pa, did he work the mines?" He shook his head. Used to run the telegraph station up by the ridge. Said things were getting strange lately. Messages coming in that didn't make sense. Then he stopped telling me. Annabeth swore under her breath. He saw transmissions, shipments, maybe names. Rose's eyes widened. So this isn't just about land or money. It's about secrets and anyone who ever touched them, Annabeth said grimly. Which means us, and Matthew, and God knows how many others. She stood, started pacing. Rose watched her. "What do we do?" Annabeth stared into the fire. "We find the rest of the names." Rose blinked. "You burned the list." "I burned the copy," Annabeth said. "But I remember some. And there's one name I didn't forget." "Whose?" "Samuel Creed." Rose frowned. "Who's that?" Annabeth looked at her. "The man who used to run with Slater. Until he disappeared 2 winters ago. Folks said he was dead. I think he's hiding." "Where?" Annabeth's jaw tightened. "There's a town west of the old ridge line. Ghost town now. They say it's cursed. But I know Samuel was headed there last I heard." Rose shivered. "You think he'll help us?" Annabeth met her eyes. "I think he's scared enough to tell us what we need." They reached the ghost town 5 days later. Its name had long since rotted off the signpost, but Annabeth remembered it well. Ridgeview. Once a mining boom town, now just dust and broken windows. The wind there never stopped moving. Like the town itself, still whispered warnings no one was left to hear. The church still stood, half collapsed but sturdy in the bones. That's where they found the lantern light. Samuel Creed hadn't aged well. He was thinner, pale, hair gone white, but his eyes were sharp and sunken with the kind of paranoia that could only be earned. He opened the door with a rifle raised. Annabeth didn't flinch. "Hello, Sam," she said. He stared at her, then lowered the rifle slowly. "Didn't expect to see you again, Annie." "Funny," she said. "I was hoping you'd say that." He let them inside, offered no tea, no chai, just silence. Then, "If you're here, it means you've found a shaft." Annabeth nodded. "And the list." His face paled. "You burned it?" "Yes." "Good." But his hands were trembling. "What?" Rose asked gently. Why keep a list at all? Samuel looked at her like she was a child asking about monsters under the bed. Because Slater doesn't trust anyone. Never has. He wanted names. Leverage. Proof. Folks he could squeeze if the law ever came sniffing. And now, Annabeth pressed. Samuel swallowed. Now he's hunting anyone who ever touched it. Even folks like me. Then help us, she said. Give us something we can use to end this. He hesitated. Then he reached beneath the altar and pulled out a tin box. Inside, another badge. This one was still clean. Marshal Briggs. Annabeth sucked in a breath. Briggs was on the take. Samuel nodded. And not just him. Judges. Deputies. Anyone Slater could buy. Rose looked horrified. How do we stop it? Samuel looked at Annabeth. There's only one thing he's afraid of. Her. Who? Rose whispered. Samuel's eyes darkened. His sister. They left Ridgeview before dawn. Samuel gave them everything he had. Names, dates, warnings. Said he wouldn't leave the church. Said it was the only place left that still felt like penance. Annabeth didn't argue. She had enough ghosts already. They rode hard for the next town. No longer running. Now hunting. Because if Slater had a sister, someone who knew the books, the names, the blood, she might be the key to unraveling it all. But it wouldn't be easy. Slater wouldn't let her walk free. Not if she still had secrets to spill. And if they were right, then they weren't just up against a man anymore. They were up against an empire built on silence. The town was called Bellwater, one of those crooked settlements built too fast and left to rot when the silver vein dried up. A single muddy street, a row of leaning buildings, a church that doubled as a courtroom on Sundays, and a saloon that hadn't cleaned its windows since the last flood. Annabeth and Rose rode in at dusk with Eli bundled beneath Annabeth's coat, sleeping hard from fever and exhaustion. The boy hadn't stirred much since Ridgeview, his body burning hot as a stove, and his dreams full of names he mumbled in fits. But this was the place. If the whispers Samuel Creed fed them were true, this was where they'd find her, the sister. The ghost in Slater's shadow. Her name was Clara Slater, though no one said it out loud. Folks around here only called her the widow, which Annabeth found ironic, considering Clara had never married. But she'd outlived 2 brothers, 5 hired guns, and a fire that burned half of Slater's holdings to ash. And if there was still blood and power left in the Slater family, Clara was the one who held its reins. Annabeth dismounted outside the saloon. The building leaned westward like it was trying to fall into the sunset. She handed the reins to Rose and looked her square in the eye. You sure about this? Rose's face was pale but steady. We didn't come this far to walk away. Annabeth nodded once. Stay with Eli. Keep him warm. I won't be long. Inside, the saloon stank of sweat, smoke, and slow rot. A piano player tapped a crooked tune that nobody was listening to. 3 men sat at the far table, hunched and quiet, nursing drinks like they held poison. A girl in a patched red dress moved between tables with a tray and a look that said she'd rather be anywhere else. Clara sat in the corner, alone. She wore black, not for mourning, but for power. A long coat, velvet cuffs, gloves that never came off. Her hair was bound tight at her nape, and a long silver chain hung around her neck with a tiny gold key at the end. Annabeth walked straight to her, sat down without asking. Clara didn't look surprised. You're late, she said. Annabeth blinked. You were expecting me? Clara sipped her drink. Something dark and slow burning. Not you. Someone. You'll do. Annabeth studied her. You're not surprised your brother's in trouble? I'd be more surprised if he weren't. Trouble is his only legacy. Annabeth didn't waste time. He's been killing his own. Anyone tied to the mines. The shipments. Even a boy who saw the wrong letter. Clara didn't flinch. I know. Then why haven't you stopped him? Clara's eyes flicked up, sharp as a blade. Because I don't need to. He's dying. Annabeth stared. What? Clara leaned in, voice low. Consumption. Took root last spring. He's losing weight, blood, mind. And now, like all desperate men, he's clawing at what little power he has left, trying to clean up before he goes cold. Annabeth leaned back slowly. He tried to clean us up, burned a farm, shot a child, hunted us through the snow. And Clara asked. Annabeth's mouth curled. We're still standing. Clara looked pleased. Good. Silence stretched between them. Then Annabeth said, "We want to end it." Clara looked toward the bar, then back. "You'll need proof." "He's still got the land deed that ties him to the mine. It's hidden safe. He guards it like it's his soul." "Where?" Clara tapped the gold key at her neck. "In the vault under the house." "Let me guess," Annabeth said. "You're the only one who can open it." Clara smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Now you're catching up." Annabeth sat back, thought for a moment. "Why help us?" Clara's eyes darkened. "Because I buried 2 brothers for that land. One in the river, one in a pine box with a bullet between his eyes. And now Matthew's bleeding out while slaughtering innocents in the dark. That land cursed us. Every acre soaked in blood." And Clara's voice sharpened. "And I want it gone. I won't watch it burn. I want the ledger emptied, the vault cracked, the whole name dragged into the light. I want people to spit when they hear Slater." Annabeth met her gaze. "Then give me the key." Clara's smile turned thin. "I'll do you one better. I'll take you there myself." The Slater estate sat atop Widow's Bluff, an hour's ride from Bellwater. By morning, they were on the road, Annabeth, Clara, Rose, and Eli bundled in the wagon. The boy hadn't spoken in 2 days. His fever ebbed, but left his body drained, eyes sunken. He clutched Rose's hand like it was the last thread holding him to the waking world. As they approached the house, Clara's posture stiffened. The estate loomed ahead like a memory half forgotten. Big, brooding, with shuttered windows and a sagging roofline. No lights, no smoke, no life. "Is he here?" Rose asked quietly. Clara nodded once. "He doesn't leave anymore. Hasn't for weeks." They left the wagon hidden in the trees and approached on foot. Annabeth had a rifle. Rose carried a small revolver Clara had given her, though it shook in her grip. Clara walked like a woman going to war. The front door was unlocked. Inside, silence. They moved through the main hall with quiet steps. Dust blanketed everything. Paint peeled from the walls. Bottles lined the mantel, empty and forgotten. The stench of decay rode heavy in the air. They found Matthew Slater in the study, or what was left of him. He sat slumped in a leather chair, face hollowed by illness, skin waxy with fever. A bottle lay at his feet, and a pistol rested on the desk beside him. He didn't look up, only said, "I knew you'd come." Annabeth stepped forward. "You remember me?" Matthew coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Hard to forget the first woman you failed." Annabeth kept her tone even. "You burned farms, killed boys, started a war." He chuckled weakly. "That wasn't war. That was cleanup." Clara stepped beside Annabeth, eyes cold. "You always did think you were the cleaner." Matthew finally looked up. "Sister, still dressing like a widow? And you're still dying slower than the rot in this house," she replied. Rose moved to the edge of the room, her hand on Eli's shoulder. The boy was awake now, staring wide-eyed at the man who'd ordered his father's death. Matthew looked at them all and smiled. "Come to watch me die?" "No," Annabeth said. "We came for the vault." He laughed again, then coughed until blood stained his lips. "Of course you did. Always about the land. The map. The gold." "There's no gold," Clara said. "No, Matthew whispered. Only graves." Annabeth stepped forward. "Give us the vault. Give us the deed. Let end here." Matthew looked at her, truly looked, and something flickered in his eyes. Regret, or memory, or maybe just the bitter taste of being outlived. He nodded barely. Clara moved to the fireplace, pulled the painting aside, and revealed the iron door behind it. She inserted the gold key. The vault clicked open. Inside, papers, ledgers, maps, a pistol, and the deed, signed and sealed in Slater's hand. Annabeth took it. Rose stepped forward, pulled out the last letter Matthew had sent her, and laid it on the table beside him. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why send for me?" Matthew didn't answer at first. Then, because I was afraid. Because even when I knew it was ending, I wanted to believe someone still gave a damn. Rose's eyes filled. "I did. I would have." He closed his eyes. "I know." Silence settled like dust. Then Matthew whispered, "Tell them I died fast." No, Annabeth said. We'll tell them the truth. He didn't open his eyes again. When he stopped breathing, no one moved. By nightfall, the house was burning. Clara watched from the bluff as flames ate through the roof and walls. Annabeth stood beside her, the deed in one hand and the ledger in the other. What will you do now? Annabeth asked. Clara's jaw clenched. Disappear. The Slater name dies tonight. Annabeth nodded. Good. Rose stood a few paces back, Eli at her side. The boy was awake, warm, quiet, but his eyes still held ghosts. Annabeth turned to them. It's done. Rose didn't smile, just took her hand. Behind them, the fire raged. Ahead, the road curved east. They didn't speak of what came next. They just rode, together, toward whatever peace the world had left to give. The road away from Widow's Bluff was the quietest any of them had known. No hoofbeats behind them, no riders in the trees, no messages tucked in saddlebags bearing threats or names to run from. Just cold wind through tall grass, the hush of pine branches swaying overhead, and the soft breathing of a child who had finally fallen into dreamless sleep. Eli lay across the back of the wagon, bundled in every scrap of warmth they could spare, his skin no longer burning, his face no longer sunken. Rose sat beside him, watching the horizon with wary hope while Annabeth rode ahead, rifle slung across her back, and every muscle still tight with habit. Clara Slater was gone. She'd vanished before dawn, leaving only a slip of paper folded on the wagon seat with a final message. Don't look for me. Don't remember me. Annabeth hadn't expected more. Clara had walked away from the wreckage of her family like someone finally crawling out from under a collapsed roof. No joy, no triumph. Just escape. She'd burned the name down to its bones, and now she wanted no one picking through the ash. They traveled for 4 days in the direction of Crosswinds, a quiet town Annabeth remembered from her years as a deputy. Small, law-abiding, and tucked far enough from the old Slater reach that even a name like Dalton might fade without trouble. Eli needed a doctor. Rose needed rest. And Annabeth needed, she didn't know, maybe just somewhere she could stop listening for footsteps that never came. But peace, as always, didn't last. On the 5th morning, as they passed a dry creek bed just outside town, a figure stepped onto the road. He was tall, lean, wrapped in a charcoal duster with a flat-brimmed hat pulled low. Not Slater's kind, not greedy or smug. This one moved like someone who'd been trained to follow, not lead. A man paid to finish what others started. And as soon as Annabeth's horse saw him, it stopped, refused to take another step. Annabeth's hand went to her rifle. The man lifted one hand. Don't. His voice was calm, smooth as a still lake. Annabeth didn't lower the weapon. You planning to shoot? No, he said. Planning to ask. She studied him. Ask what? If it's true, he said, that the Slater vault burned, that Matthew's dead, that you lit the match. Annabeth didn't answer. He nodded slowly. Guess it is. Who are you? He stepped closer, enough for the wind to pull his coat back and show the badge pinned beneath. Federal. She cursed inwardly. Rose climbed down from the wagon, her face pale. They sent the government now. The man looked at her, then at Eli, who'd sat up, blinking groggily at the stranger. The agent's eyes softened for a flicker of a second. Name's Whitaker, he said. Been tracking Slater operations for 3 years. We thought we'd pinned it all to Creed until he went dark. Then word came down that someone cracked the vault. You ended it. Annabeth kept her stance guarded. Why does that matter to you now? Because fire doesn't erase paper, he said. And we think something from that vault survived. Annabeth went cold. What survived? Whitaker reached into his coat, not fast, and pulled out a torn envelope. Inside, a photograph. Faded, scorched at the edges, but still legible. It showed a man. Not Matthew. Not Creed. Another. Standing in front of a rail car marked with a government seal. Holding a crate labeled Westport Armory. Annabeth's stomach dropped. I saw that name in the ledger. Westport. So did we, Whitaker said. It's not just about Slater land. Or debts. It's bigger. Guns. Land deeds. Smuggling routes. And there are still names on that list you didn't get. Rose stepped closer, eyes wide. What are you saying? I'm saying Slater was a branch, not the tree. Annabeth swallowed hard. And now we pick up the pieces. But we're going to need testimony. Names. Routes. Someone who saw the original documents. His eyes drifted to Eli. Annabeth's voice hardened. He's a child. He saw enough. He's not giving you a damn thing. Whitaker studied her, then glanced back toward the wagon. I don't want to put a child through a tribunal. But the name Slater doesn't end with Matthew. There are still men out there, federal, private, foreign, who bought what he sold. If we don't cut the roots, it grows back. Annabeth didn't answer right away. The wind picked up, rattling dry leaves across the road. Finally, she said, we burned the house, the land, the vault. But Clara, she knew more. If she left anything behind, it's yours. Where'd she go? Whitaker asked. Annabeth met his eyes. She didn't say. That was true, but it wasn't everything. That night, they made camp under a wide oak and cooked the last of the jerky. Eli slept fitfully, waking once to whisper his father's name. Rose lay beside him, humming softly, a tune no one else recognized. Annabeth stayed up, sitting by the fire with a map spread on her lap. Not Slater's old map, but one Clara had pressed into her hands before disappearing. Folded inside it, a second slip of paper. 3 names, 3 towns, all far east. At the bottom, Clara had written one line. If you want to finish it, follow the tracks. Annabeth traced the route. None of them were places she knew well. But one name stood out. Gallows Reach, a mining town turned prison hub, half run by rail companies, half by war veterans. If any of Slater's buyers were still moving product, it was likely going through Gallows. She folded the map, looked across the fire at Rose. I should take Eli to Crosswinds. Leave you two there. Rose looked up, and then I follow this. Rose was quiet for a long time. Then, I'll go with you. No, Annabeth said. You've lost too much already. So have you, Rose said. Annabeth didn't answer. But in the morning, when they reached Crosswinds, she only left the boy. Rose rode with her. Gallows Reach was nothing like its name suggested. It was worse. The first thing they saw was the smoke, steady columns rising from iron stacks. Then the noise. Hammers, wheels, shouts. A town always moving, always hungry. Rail lines split the town like scars. Every third man carried a badge. Not marshal, not sheriff. Rail authority. Hired guns paid by steel and speed. They checked into a boarding house under false names. Waited for nightfall. Then they found the shipment. It wasn't hidden, just guarded. A long crate loaded into a rail car marked for westbound travel. The logo matched the one from Whitaker's photo. So did the paperwork. Rose picked the lock. Annabeth lifted the lid. Inside, rifles. Government issue. Stamped and clean. But under them, buried beneath straw, another ledger. And at the top, a seal. Not Slater's. Federal. Rose whispered, it goes deeper than him. Annabeth felt her blood go cold. This whole time, he wasn't running it. He was guarding it. They didn't get to study it long. Boots hit the gravel outside. Shouts. Gunfire. Annabeth grabbed the ledger, shoved it in her coat. Run. They bolted into the alleys behind the depot as bullets tore through crates. Rose stumbled, but kept moving. Annabeth grabbed her arm and dragged her through a narrow gap between 2 buildings. More footsteps. More voices. They were being hunted, not by bandits, by soldiers. They made it out only because a stranger pulled them into the back of a chapel and slammed the door. She was tall, dark-skinned, with braids tucked under a scarf and a shotgun over her shoulder. She said nothing until the voices outside faded. Then she turned. You brought hell on your heels. Annabeth panted. And you are. The woman crossed her arms. Name's Cora Ellis. I've been tracking this rail corruption for 2 years. Rose blinked. You're not with the law. No, Cora said. I'm with the ones the law forgot. Annabeth pulled out the ledger. Then we're on the same side. Cora glanced at it. You better hope so. Because the moment they know you have that, they'll burn this whole town just to stop you. Annabeth didn't flinch. She met Cora's eyes. Then we burned them first. Cora's chapel wasn't much. Just an old freight house hollowed out and converted with faith and grit. Wooden pews lined the sides, though nobody prayed here anymore. The altar had been replaced with a heavy oak table covered in maps, notes, broken lanterns, and a rusted revolver. Light poured in through a cracked window, throwing long shadows across the walls as Cora laid the ledger flat between them, brushing off the soot and grit with the sleeve of her coat. "What you're holding," she said, tapping a gloved finger to the embossed federal seal on the ledger's cover, "ain't just evidence. It's a death sentence." Annabeth didn't flinch. "For who?" "For anyone who carries it too long," Cora replied. Slater was a front, but these pages tie the rail companies straight to military stockpiles. Arms moved through Gallows Reach, down through the salt chain, and into territories where they had no business being. Unmarked, unregistered, untaxed. Rose leaned over the table, her eyes scanning the pages. Some of these names judges, mayors, even a bishop, Cora said, everyone dipping fingers in the same trough. Slater was just the scarecrow, meant to keep eyes away from the real crows. Annabeth ran a hand down her face, bone-tired but sharper than she'd felt in days. "What do we do with it?" "We publish," Cora said. "We don't take it to the marshals. We don't hand it to a crooked judge. We get it in the hands of people who can't be bought. Journalists, whistle stations, telegraph crews who owe no man favors." "And you know someone like that?" Rose asked. Cora gave a grim smile. "I used to be one." She pulled a worn tin case from her bag and flipped it open to reveal a set of press credentials. Cora Ellis, Territory Tribune. The photo was old, but the fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. "Before they burned my paper and put a price on my head," she said. "I've been collecting stories ever since. Hiding when I had to, watching them build their little empire. But this ledger, this is the one thing they can't deny." Annabeth nodded. "So where do we go?" "There's a press run out of Iron Hook," Cora said. 3 towns west. Independent. Private. They've smuggled war, truths past censors before. If we can get the ledger there, they'll blast it across every wire line in the territory." Rose frowned. "And if they catch us before then?" Cora's face darkened. "Then we don't let them." They left before dawn. No wagons. No big roads. Just horses and back trails through dry gulches and frostbitten woods. Cora knew the land well, where the creeks ran low, where the gullies offered cover, where a man on horseback couldn't follow. Still, they were chased. By the second day, a rider was spotted at a ridge behind them. Not close enough to shoot, close enough to watch. "He's not alone," Cora said. "He's signaling. Probably 3 more behind him." Annabeth adjusted the rifle on her back. "We lose them. We try." But the terrain turned cruel. Rocky slopes, frozen streams. By day 3, the horses stumbled with fatigue, and Rose's cheeks were raw from wind and cold. Eli's name stayed on all their lips, a silent prayer they didn't speak aloud. On the 4th night, they reached a cabin, abandoned, half-collapsed, but standing. "We rest here," Annabeth said, voice firm. One night, Cora lit a small fire in the hearth. They didn't speak as they stripped the saddles, boiled snow for water, and split the last of the jerky. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind outside, made them pause. Rose curled in the corner near the flames, eyes wide open. Annabeth didn't sleep. She stared at the ledger. Flipping the last few pages, she found something new, something she hadn't noticed before. A single name, Dalton. Her breath caught. Matthew's full name hadn't been there. But this one was unmistakable. Rose saw the change in her face. "What is it?" Annabeth turned the book so Rose could see. Rose stared. "It's your name." "No," Annabeth said, her voice hollow. "It's my father's." Cora looked up from the fire. "What did he do?" Annabeth's mouth was dry. "He sold arms. I thought he just made his money from ranching. But this ledger, this shows he supplied crates to the southern camps. Used Slater as a go-between." Cora moved beside her. "How long's he been dead?" Annabeth swallowed. 20 years. "Then this ledger's not just about who's alive," Cora said. "It's about who made the world the way it is." Annabeth closed the book, her hands shaking. "Then let's make sure no one forgets it." They reached Iron Hook on the 5th day. Barely. Cora's horse was limping, one shoe twisted. Rose had a cracked rib from a fall off a slick ridge. Annabeth's right hand was bloodied from where she'd pulled a thorned branch free as they scrambled through a ravine. But they were there. The press sat in the back of a general store, buried behind sacks of grain and boxes of dried tobacco. A boy no older than 14 opened the door and blinked at them like they were ghosts. Cora handed him the ledger. "Run this." The boy nodded and vanished. 2 hours later, the first pages came rolling off the press. Headline: Slater Empire Exposed. Federal Complicity in Arms Trade uncovered subheadlines named judges. Listed towns. Even published shipping routes. Annabeth felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been twisted tight for years. By sundown, copies were being wired out to 5 neighboring states. By nightfall, writers were already asking questions. By morning, it was war, not of bullets, but of truth. The powerful tried to buy silence, but the damage was done. Too many eyes had seen the ink. Too many names had been printed. Some disappeared overnight. Others rode into town and surrendered. Clara was never mentioned. Her part stayed hidden, as she'd asked. But the story? It belonged to the people now. They stayed in Iron Hook long enough to see the first marshals arrive. Long enough for a telegram to come from Crosswinds. Eli was healthy again. Running. Laughing. Asking for stories. Annabeth cried for the first time in years. She and Rose sat on the chapel steps the next night. This one real, not a freight house pretending to be sacred. "You think it's over?" Rose asked. Annabeth looked up at the stars. "No." "But it's something," Rose whispered. Annabeth nodded. "It's a start." Cora joined them with coffee in hand. "I'm heading south next week. Another paper's asking for testimony. You two welcome to ride with me." Annabeth looked at Rose, and Rose smiled. Weeks passed. The name Slater vanished from the wires, replaced by new headlines, new sins to chase. But in some corners, people still remembered the fire on Widow's Bluff. Still remembered a woman who returned to save the man who left her behind. Still remembered how justice rode into town not with law, but with truth. And somewhere far from all that, a boy named Eli woke each morning to the sound of laughter and safety. He grew up with stories, not of war or greed, but of women who did not break, who burned old names to make room for something better. Family.